It's hard to be what you can't see, so we're gonna stand up for our young ones. Together, we're gonna help them see it, to be it. Join the war. Thank you to Heaps Normal for standing here with us.
We acknowledge the First Nations people as the traditional owners and sovereign custodians of the land on which we work and live. We recognise their continuing connection to country and their respective nations across this continent and pay our respects to their elders past and present. We also celebrate the unique and inspiring creativity and songlines of the world's oldest living culture and give thanks for the immeasurable influence First Nations people continue to have over the music and art we all enjoy.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Innovation and Entrepreneurship panel here in ARIA Week. My name's Holly Rankin. I'm joining from Gadigal land in Sydney. I'd like to acknowledge elders past, present and emerging before we begin today. I'm joined by Mardi Caught, founder and director of the Annex, Jaddan Comerford, director, CEO and founder of Unified, and Connelly, creative director and head of Blackbird Foundation. So we're going to talk a bunch of really fun topics today: entrepreneurship, innovation, and how these two things are interacting with artist businesses as we move into a very wild west future on the internet. So let's just get started. I'd love to go around the circle and hear a little bit about our guests, where they started, who they are, and the business that they founded. So Mardi, first to you.
Thanks, Holly. Hi, everyone. My name is Mardi Caught. I'm coming to you from Gadigal country today as well. I have worked in the music industry for a couple of decades now. I won't admit how many, but I was major label side for various years, working at both EMI, Sony and Warner Music. I spent 10 years working in the UK, where I worked in international divisions for EMI over there, as well as heading up the talent and music team for MTV. And then came back here and started a business in 2018 called the Annex. And our sole purpose is helping artists strategize and plan their marketing and having access to some knowledge and information that they wouldn't normally get unless they did a major label deal. So that's the business that we play in, which is exciting and fun and very new.
Awesome. So good. And Joel, a little bit about you.
Hi everyone, my name's Joel, coming at you from Wiradjuri. I was in the music industry for 8 or 9 years. I was an artist manager. I co-founded a company with Greg Carey, and we managed the Rubens, the Cloud Control, Earth Boy, Fishing, and a bunch of others. And I now work in technology investing, venture capital, a company called Blackbird Ventures. I'm the creative director for Blackbird Ventures, but I am also the head of the Blackbird Foundation. And Blackbird Foundation's mission is to unleash creativity in young people. And we do a lot of work, like I said, venture capital, if you don't know, it's just technology investing. So we find startups, high growth technology companies, and we give them money and support to help them grow their businesses.
Awesome. Can't wait to hear a little bit more about some of those businesses later. And Jaddan.
Hey, I'm Jaddan Comerford. I'm coming at you from Wiradjuri country. I am the founder and CEO of Unified Music Group. I've been in music pretty much all my life. I finished high school in 2001 and decided to start a record label. I didn't think that I would still be sitting here this many years later. It's will be 20 years next year. But essentially, I just followed a journey through the music industry that got me to this point where we now run record labels and a management company and festivals, and we invest in lots of wonderful entrepreneurs running businesses. And yeah, I'm just very passionate about our industry and where we're heading. And yeah, that's me.
Awesome. Okay. We're aware today that there's loads of different people joining, so we're going to talk a little bit about entrepreneurship and how these awesome people got here in the first place. So, Jaddan, we're going to start with you. How did you start Unified, and more importantly, why did you start Unified?
Yeah, so Unified music group celebrated 10 years this year. But prior to that, yeah, my original business was called Boomtown Records. And I guess, like, I've always loved music. It's hard to find people that don't love music, but also I've just always had a passion for business from a very young age, and not so much the money. It was never about that, because it took a very long time to be able to even cover costs being in music. But I was just very, I've always been, and still I'm very fascinated by the idea of building things. But my story goes back to just starting and trying. And, you know, when you're, they say things like ignorance is bliss. And I didn't know how hard it was going to be. And so I did it. If I had have known that it was going to be as hard as it was, I may not have done it. But equally, the lessons that I learned along the way in those early days is what allowed me to get to this point. But yeah, essentially, I just put one foot in front of the other and grew the business from one person being me to a team of people of over 70 people now. And it's taken nearly 20 years, so it's not an overnight success story. And it is always a work in progress on a daily basis. But yeah, that's really how it all got started.
Amazing. That's so massive that it's been that long. Can you tell us a little bit about those few startup years when it was, say, 1 to 5 people? What did that feel like as a younger entrepreneur? Did you have moments where you were thinking, oh God, this is a wild idea and I can't move forward? Or what was that moment after that where you felt like you were feeling steady and like you'd made the right decision?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of things in life sometimes happen like this, but I had success relatively early, as in I had signs early on that I had something that was going to work. But that was very quickly followed by the reality that not everything you do works. I distinctly remember I was still living at home at this time. I must have been like 20, and I was talking to my older brother, and he said, oh yeah, what's happening at the moment? I said, oh, X band's going in to record their album tomorrow. And he goes, oh, how do you pay for that? And I literally said, I don't know. Like, I didn't know. I just was like, yeah, we'll make a record and we'll pay for it somehow. And I think the next morning I went and got a credit card from the bank and somehow managed to convince them to give me that. But I think ultimately when things became real was when I started to build a team. And that's one of the scariest things, I think, to do in business, because that's when you start to not only hand money to other people, but also hand responsibility. And I have this saying, like, because people say all those like cliches, like, oh, if you want something done right, you got to do it yourself. Like, that's just not true. Like, maybe for some things, like brushing your teeth or, you know, doing something very specific. But in business, the only way you grow is by empowering other people. And I often say to my team when they're building teams themselves is when you first delegate something to someone, they may not do it as well as you have done it in the past yourself, but eventually if you give them space and time and empower them, they'll do it 100 times better than you could have ever done it. And once you start to have others own things, that's when things really start to grow. And that was the early stages for me when I started to see that I was going to be able to build something.
That's awesome. It's nice little notes for people watching to listen out for. And Mardi, you decided to create your own entity, the Annex, mid-career after spending a fair few years in very senior positions in the music industry around the world. Why did you decide to go it alone and create the Annex? And was that scary for you, or was it exciting, or a bit of both? And yeah, when did you find that moment that Jaddan found where you're like, okay, this is sweet, we're doing this?
Still haven't quite found that moment yet. Heading towards it. I decided, I guess the reason why I decided to go out and try my own way was because I got to a certain point within the system and how the system worked that meant that I couldn't progress any further personally and individually. And it was a case of trying to make your own opportunity. But at the same time, seeing how much the industry was changing in terms of how labels had started to behave. They'd moved from being kind of a very, very heavily developmental kind of model where they'd have artists sign and develop them for years before they waited for the returns to come through, to more of a model where they were continually annualizing what was working, what was hot, what was streaming, what they should invest in. So I kind of, having always experienced that part of my career where we worked on developmental artists, and that was always the most rewarding part, from taking something from nothing to seeing it come to fruition, there was still a gap in the market there. And so that's kind of where I saw an opportunity, and talked to people around me. And when you say going it alone, I think very rarely in small business do you go it alone, because you kind of have to outsource a lot of the support. So there were people like Jaddan I'd have a chat to, a lot of people who were running their own businesses already, whether they be publicists or managers, who were amazing in the way that they supported and helped me just do basic things like set up an invoicing system and all those things that you just, as Jen said, how do you pay for things? How do you get paid for things? And I'd gone from the reverse of being, a prime delegator within a record company to suddenly having to work out how to send a Dropbox link. And that was just the scariest thing in the world, because I had to kind of reskill and tool up again, but almost do it backwards. So it was exciting and it was humbling. It was very hard. And I think, I'm not going to lie, I think everyone who runs small business wakes up every day feeling scared, but that's kind of why we do it as well. So yeah, that's it.
Totally agree. And I think you make such a nice point there. Like, we're talking about entrepreneurship, and it's so often focused on the entrepreneur as this one person that's driving this thing, but it's never ever that. And if it was that, it doesn't have long to go, because it'll crash. So yeah, it's a really nice point in these conversations to think it's not just any one person, on this call. It's always a team. Yeah, so that's awesome to hear. And Joel, over to you. You've made a hashtag pivot from the music industry and moved into to use some venture capital wording. It might be a bit old school now, but you've moved into venture capital. What made you want to explore another area of business, and what's the relationship with your new position and the positions you had in the music industry? How do you feel?
Well, congratulations. Firstly, pivot's still a thing. People still pivot a lot, so you're right on the money. I think, like, I've always been interested in technology, and so the reason I moved and changed, what I was doing, is because an opportunity came along, and I was already really interested in technology, and I love working with creative people, and founders are artists and artists are founders, and so the jumping over from artist management into venture capital, didn't feel like such a massive change to me. It felt like I was just going to work with a different kind of creative person, and so the move didn't feel that revolutionary at the time. And the other reason was that we, like everybody, who starts a business, we started managing, not really knowing what we were doing, and so we slowly kind of built up a thing, and we had some success, and we got to a point where I felt like our business was too top heavy. There were too many founders. We didn't have enough, tier one bands to support as many, founders as were, in the business. So from a business perspective, it made sense that one of us left, and I had the opportunity to leave. And so I did. And yeah, I enjoy it. I still miss music a lot. I miss working with musicians and artists in music sense, but I still really love it. Like, I get to work with creative people every day, and Blackbirds are, in the way that a manager works to kind of supercharge a couple of artists. You lend your intellect and your time and your energy to try and support artists grow their businesses. Venture capital is no different. You lend a ton of money, and you get to work with a ton more bands or creative people than you would have as a manager. So I like it. It's good.
That's awesome. Yeah, and we do forget that every artist is a founder. Very great point. Can you, before we go on, because we're all wondering, what amazing areas of business you're working on, can you give us a quick overview, so while we're in this conversation, we can imagine what you're up to.
Yeah, yeah. So the things that we invest in, we do everything from like software to space. So from a software side of things, we invest in companies like Canva, which many of you might know. You might use it in your businesses. We invest in another software company called Culture Amp and Safety Culture. But then we do really interesting stuff. So we have people building new kinds of, solar panels that use copper instead of silver. We have people working on clean meat and synthetic meat. So meat that doesn't come off an animal but is grown in a lab or comes from a plant. We have what do we got? We got like people sending rockets into space and CubeSats to go along with those rockets. It's really, really diverse. The only kind of stuff that we say is that for Blackbird specifically, we say we invest in people from Australia and New Zealand, and you've got to have a global ambition from the very first day you start your business. Doesn't mean you have to have necessarily customers and, a game plan to be in every territory straight away, but your ambition has to be global. And so that leads us to this really diverse, crazy, array of things.
Yeah, awesome. Very exciting. So good. And so speaking of global promoters, basically any music company is generally globally ambitious, but COVID has somewhat decimated our industry over the past 2 years. But Jaddan, you're always one to find the gold in the rubble. Can you affect your business? I know that could be a short novel, but how did you navigate that? And are there any kind of major innovations that you stumbled upon or sought out as a reaction to what COVID did or is doing to your unified empire?
Thanks, Holly. COVID was obviously it's still going, right? It affected all of us. But I think where it affected us the most and affected the music industry the most on a negative sense was obviously live music. And that created a huge void for all sorts of things, from a marketing point of view, from a revenue point of view, from a mental health point of view, from even just like a sense of purpose. Rescheduling tours is pretty mundane work. But for me, I made a commitment early on to cut as few costs as possible and try to keep, pretty much everybody employed. And that was sort of my main thing, like, let's make everyone safe. And then from there, I considered the kind of like, I'll just meditate for 18 months kind of option, because that was very tempting to me. But I went the exact opposite, and I said, well, how do I completely supercharge my ability to learn and research through this time? And so I felt like I'd sort of sent myself back to school, and I just went and learned as much as I could. I had a very pivotal phone call with Joe Miles, who's one of our artist managers, who, realizing he was going to struggle to make any commissions, he said, hey, why don't we manage gamers? And at that point, I didn't really know what that meant, but early next year, we're going to be launching Unified Gaming, which is our gaming business. Just last week we launched Unified Investments, which is our investment company, which is hardly holds a candle to Blackbird, but it's our version of Blackbird, where we're investing in startups solving problems for the music industry. And we've invested in companies like Heaps Normal, Mr. Yum, Serenade, Tixel, Muso, and a bunch of other really exciting companies. So for me, I guess I started all of this stuff because it was like survival. Then there was kind of like, how do I keep myself interested? And not sort of like dooming and glooming about everything that was going on. But then very quickly it started to find this sort of convergence with this innovation piece and how this was actually potentially going to be what the future was going to be for our company. And so, I've kind of like retrained my brain to think and learn in new ways. And then the other way that things have changed, and this is looking at the positive, is like, because I used to travel a lot internationally, and the only way to meet people was to meet them. But I'm investing in companies and starting businesses with people I've never met before. And some people might think that's creepy or weird, but if you spend 50 hours on Zoom with someone, what's the difference to that or having a coffee with them in New York for 45 minutes once every 2 years? And so that ability to just connect and create opportunity, I think has rapidly changed the way that I think. I think it's only just starting to change the way unified is, but it's definitely a big part of our future as to how we've evolved and how we'll continue to evolve and innovate as a group of companies.
Yeah, amazing. So great to hear how that's affected everything, and I feel like I could ask a million questions on that. But Mardi, how has COVID changed the way you do business and you're seeing things in the music industry?
Well, we all keep laughing that people finally know what QR codes are, which is great as a marketing person because we wanted that for a decade, and it's like now we can finally use them properly, so that's good. I think the best part for me is how it's changed the relationship between the band and the audience as well. Like, as much as people haven't had that wonderful experience of playing live and having those interactions, it's kind of made bands think differently about how they can connect. So it's changed everything from, thinking more strategically about what merchandise looks like and how that fits your fan or your audience, how you can use your social platforms. And even if you look at things like TikTok, I doubt that probably would have been so kind of readily absorbed if we hadn't all been in lockdown for a period of time and kids were trying to escape from their parents. So, those things that kind of escalated massively in a very, very short space of time have been amazingly freeing, because you can then think about how you can market differently and talk directly. I think the other part, which it kind of feels like now we're getting to the end of the year, everyone just feels very, very not burnt out, but I think everyone's had quite a full-on year. And when you look at it for the last 18 months, pretty much everyone's had to retrain how they work together. And that's been a fascinating process to watch in terms of how it impacts on teams and company culture. We hired people in COVID that we hadn't met. To Jaddan's point, we did things on Zoom, and then we had our first meeting together, and it was awesome. Weird, like it's bringing a team together that had been virtual until a certain point. But that also, again, shows that people and humans are easily adaptable, and it does open up a lot of different ways you can do business if you accept the fact that virtual teams can actually work quite efficiently as well. So, yeah, as hard as it's been in terms of loss of finance and actually work in the industry, there has been some upside in terms of how the workplace has changed.
Yeah, a nice positive take again.
Try.
And Joel, because you're probably always thinking of both sides of the coin, I think everyone on this call is, but in terms of investors who are looking at the music and entertainment space, and in particular the live music space, how do you think the appetite has changed or the interest has changed in our industry, or is it still strong? And feel free to jump in, Mardi and Jaddan as well.
You mean appetite for investment?
Yeah, appetite for investment, and I guess the kind of, is it feeling positive out there? Are you looking back into the music industry thinking this is an incredible opportunity as Jaddan's seeing it and as Mardi's seeing it to reform the industry and certain areas of the industry, or is it really like a no-go zone?
Oh, no, I think, and it's not got to do with COVID, but I think appetite for investment in music has grown significantly in the last few years for a few reasons. I think firstly, there's finally liquidity in copyright, which we've not really had in a really long time. People are seeing that there's an opportunity for copyrights to be able to generate money over a long period of time thanks to streaming. So I think that's generated a lot of interest from particularly private equity. So people... It's not just something you can make money off once and then you need to, find other ways to exploit it. For example, touring or merch. You actually can make money from the work itself for, indefinitely. So I think that's driven the appetite. Secondly, the financial markets are just like bonkers. There's more money than there's ever been. It's like crazy at the moment. So there is lots of appetite for investment. I think, in all kinds of different things. And I think we're seeing for the first time as well, like in like actual creativity and art being like really highly valued. And I'm sure we'll get to it, but we'll talk about NFTs and crypto and Web3 in a minute. But like an NFT is just a contract, right? Like it's a smart contract. But the use of art has made it a prominent technology. It's given people something to trade in. And I think people are starting to realize now just actually how valuable like meaningful works and products are to people. And music specifically is an incredibly meaningful and valuable thing to people. We're just now figuring out ways to be able to actually make, well, we've always been able to make money from it, but just now the money is being distributed in a way that's a bit fairer. So I think there's definitely a lot of appetite and a lot of energy for people who are making things in creative spaces, and particularly in music. There's also a lot of appetite for investors who are, they've just got so much money they don't know what to do with it.
It's good to know as an artist, and something I'm excited to hear from all of you. So I think that's an awesome segue into the next frontier of our industry. Mardi, sorry, you've worked in so many different roles at labels, and you're seeing artist projects, from the beginning to end and in between. What do you see as the next frontier for the music industry? And if streaming was the last major disruption, what is next?
I think Joel just hinted at it then, which is blockchain and blockchain supply, and I guess NFTs are bringing that to the forefront a little bit more. It's kind of an interesting time for the industry, because traditionally our industry will sometimes look at things and not learn from its previous mistakes. So having been around in the industry as long as I have, I've seen everything go from MTV, where people at the labels would be upset that MTV was a model that monetized their content effectively. So there were a lot of deals done across the years for labels to kind of make some money back from that sort of model. But then when YouTube started, it was kind of the same issue as MTV, but everyone regarded it as promo rather than a commercial opportunity. So it's one of those things where if you look at how it progresses, we could be smart and learn and lean into it. So if you look at what Bowie did when Bowie had his bonds and he monetized himself and sold off his catalog and got people to invest in that, that's kind of innovation that no one else has ever caught up with. But now that we've got the technology with cryptocurrency and blockchain, that's something that people can look at. So the Kings of Leon NFT was a fascinating one, because they basically shifted the value of their ticketing by using it in a time that they couldn't tour, by making the NFT not only artwork, but for seats, I think front row, for concerts for the rest of your life, which is an incredible way to kind of go, okay, well, we need income now, let's bring it forward, do that. At the end of the day, what's it going to cost them? Who knows? But they managed to sell a lot of albums and tickets off it when they couldn't do it under normal traditional means. So yeah, I think that's the bit that's kind of interesting right now.
Yeah,
Jen and John, I'm sure you've got thoughts on it as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm going to throw to Jaddan. Jaddan, how do you think that NFTs, and for anyone watching, go Google NFTs, do a 101. We're going to jump straight into this conversation. But Jaddan, how do you think this will disrupt the music industry? And do you think it is a real opportunity for artists and artist businesses to reclaim ownership over their work, or where are you at with NFTs and disruption?
Yeah, for sure. Look, I think the reality is all of this stuff is, as Marty's used the word technology, and Joel, I can't remember if it was here when we were prepping, but like ownership and, but ultimately, people, like, creativity is being valued more than ever, which is awesome. We're seeing streaming growing. We saw a great announcement from Warner Music in their last earnings call, where they were, I think, between like social media, fitness, tech, and gaming, they'd seen $250 million in revenue for the previous quarter or something along those lines. So I think before we even get to blockchain and crypto and the metaverse and everything, there's already huge amounts of growth coming into the sector, which is awesome, because music is not only being valued more, but but it's being applied in more places and more spaces. So I think we don't have to necessarily change the creative side of things. I think artists can just keep doing what they're doing. But the exciting thing is there's now going to be a whole new opportunity to monetize music. And so for me, what's so exciting about NFTs is, because what's confusing about it is people say things like, oh, it's just a pixelated JPEG or all that sort of stuff. And there's a bunch of pixelated JPEGs that get sold for millions of dollars. But there's a whole reason why those ones are being sold for those amounts of money. But what excites me the most about NFTs is they use the term utility, which is what do I get if I buy this NFT? As Marty just said, front row tickets to Kings of Leon for the rest of your life. That's amazing. That's just another version of a fan club or some kind of VIP subscription service that you've joined. NFTs is just the technology that's allowing us to properly use that. What I'm really excited about also is this concept of digital scarcity. So like when we press an album on vinyl, we press 500 copies, and when they're gone, they're gone. And those vinyl, if they're good and if people want them, the value in them increases. We're about to see the same thing with digital albums, because people are going to start to sell their albums digitally as NFTs. And it sounds crazy to think that we can limit the supply of something that's digital. But once again, this technology of what we're calling an NFT is what's going to allow us to do that. There's an artist called Domino who I actually don't know that much about Domino, but I think very soon a lot of people are going to know a lot about him. He is not a very well-known artist, but he released his album as an NFT last week, and he made $120,000 US on the release of the album. And I think if it hasn't made headlines yet, it's going to start making headlines pretty soon. And we're going to start to see more and more stories like this of artists, whether they're doing it in conjunction with their label or they're doing it themselves, it almost doesn't really matter, I don't think. Ownership is such a long conversation that we could have. But the opportunity that this creates just is going to allow us to start to do things very differently. So, digital scarcity is something that I'm very excited about.
Awesome. Yeah, let's postpone the chat on artists and labels and NFTs. Joel, did you want to build on anything Marty and Jaddan spoke about there?
Yeah, I think that I don't want to understate it. Like, I think this is what's coming at us is the most significant opportunity that we've had forever, to re-engineer the music industry and to change the way ownership works. The biggest thing holding creativity and art back in the world is the system of ownership that we've built up in music, but then also other mediums like publishing. And I'm talking book publishing. The people who create the works never own anything. Like, you don't own your IP, you don't own your customers or your fans. Like, you never have a direct relationship with the audience. It's always through a middleman or an intermediary. For the first time ever, I think in living memory, we have an opportunity to create a system that, puts the people who create the works at the center of it. And not just an opportunity for them to then get a fair share of income, but to actually build wealth. We just said a few minutes ago that, we're starting to see, money being made again in music. The copyright's always made money. Just the distribution of that money has not been fair or even that transparent. Like, no one really knows where it goes. So I think the opportunity coming with Web3 and, things within Web3 and crypto like NFTs, I think is fairly significant. And I think that anyone who's watching this, who's a creative, who wants to have any ownership over their own business or their own success, or have any chance at capturing some of the wealth that's made from their work, which is the wealth's already being made, it's just not being made by the artists. So if they want any chance at capturing some of that, I think you owe it to yourself to go and learn about this stuff and get into it. And it's sort of like, it's a funny thing talking like this around music because it's so important and meaningful to people. You don't want to think, we don't want to sound like we're commoditizing it or anything like that. But the fact is, someone else is commoditizing it for you and they're benefiting. And Web3 and crypto is a chance for artists to take some of that back, I think.
I completely agree with you. It's like a fresh right is being born in the room next door, and you got to go and, visit the baby Jesus before someone else comes in.
It's already happening. Like there are artists like fully releasing their work. Like an NFT doesn't have to be a complex concept. It's just a computer program. It can hold artwork. It can hold poetry. It can hold, it can hold code that will generate art on the fly. You can put songs in there. You can do anything. It's a piece of software that lives on a blockchain. And it's not difficult to go and learn. And I think it's just the start of what's possible in music. But I think the key to it all is that, artists can actually finally keep some ownership over the things they make and therefore have like proper direction and say and control over the business that they're building. And not just this is like a super important concept, not just be like salaried employees, which is what they are essentially. They earn, there is such a thing as copyright, and, the work they own, if they haven't signed it away to a label, they can maintain their ownership. But the system around copyright that, sees money returned to them is really old and it's not very efficient. So this is like the chance that we've all got to like make sure artists maintain ownership and then, see some of that wealth that's already been created actually get returned back to the people that make it. So go and learn about NFTs, go learn about Web3, go learn about DAOs. That's my message.
Completely agree with you.
Yeah, and just on, because I think people hear it and just think that it's a scary concept and they put it in the too hard basket. But that's the whole thing. As Jaddan breaks it down, there's like 500 vinyl. You press 500 vinyls, it's a limited edition. NFT is a different variation of limited edition. It's getting your head around that, but just knowing it's a different route to market and a different way of kind of implementing it, which gives you more control. And I think once people kind of look at that, it opens up a whole world of opportunity as well, because new is scary sometimes and people avoid it because they don't want to be scared, and now's the time to kind of jump into that.
Totally agree, especially when they put the word fungible in there. It's particularly not too endearing, but yeah, I think it's like a digital baseball card, that's kind of the nice simple way to think of it. Jaddan, you going to say something?
Well, yeah, it's funny our vocabularies have expanded with these crazy words. I was listening to this amazing interview with the head of product at Spotify talking it's a podcast called Means of Creation. They were talking about Spotify's NFT strategy, and I don't think the podcast got that much headline, but I really think it should have. And he used the terminology, we're going to have our cookie and eat it too. I think in Australia we would say have our cake and eat it too. But I'd had that conversation. There's an incredible business in Sydney called M&A, which is one of the world's first blockchain-based streaming platforms. And Sean, the founder of that, has been telling me this for over a year. It's like, not only are you going to have NFTs and the ability to monetize these scarce digital products, but you're still going to have streaming growth. Like Spotify, Apple, YouTube, it's all going to keep growing. And so this goes back to Joel's original point. There's a reason why money is flooding into the recorded music business and the music publishing business. It's because the value of music is just going to keep growing because there's going to be more and more use cases for how people pay to work with it. And so, and to Joel's point as well, we're all in the business of working with artists. Holly, obviously you're an artist yourself as well. And, Mardi left the corporate world to start a business to help artists be more successful. I've spent nearly 20 years of my life helping artists be successful. Like, there's a chance here now for artists to finally capture that wealth, but the industry can as well. And I think that's probably the biggest reset that our industry needs, is not this like winner takes all. It's like, as they say in crypto, we're all going to make it. And that's like a really important catchphrase that I think it's almost like a reset of just the world in general, that we need to try to move away from this, like, oh, that person's rich, they're really smart, they're really rich, or whatever. It's like, we can start to redistribute wealth and start to actually, as Joel says, allow artists to capture value. It's really exciting. Sorry, I'm getting a bit excited here.
No, I really love that. That's awesome. I think that that point of a change of mindset from like an apex design to a more lateral design is really exciting. And just really quickly, I want to talk about the culture of innovation and the culture of change and the environment for this kind of change, because as we all know, our industry, especially here in Australia, has been quite attached to old ways of doing things, and the music industry is somewhat archaic in the way the businesses run. So I'd love to know really quickly how Joel, maybe we'll start with you, how your company fosters innovation or change, and we'll go around the circle, and then I'd love to jump into the artist business for the last 20 minutes of our chat.
Well, we're really fortunate to be surrounded by people who are, by definition, innovative. And, I would say that over the last 15 years, the venture capital as an industry has not been innovative. We read this article a few years ago by this dude who was like, venture capital funds they're like regional accounting firms. They have a partnership system. There's like 6 people in charge. They hire 4 people, but then they invest in people who they require to be incredibly innovative and ambitious. And so we've tried to learn just from those people, the founders that we invest in. So I think it's a bit of a cheat, really. We didn't have to necessarily be ambitious ourselves to get started, relative to the people who we're trying to invest in. I don't know if that's a helpful answer, but I think that
I thought I'd throw to the software guy for the culture questions. But yeah, as we all know, there's cultural change needed everywhere. Mardi, what do you think are the ingredients for this new mindset to settle in?
I guess just accepting that change is needed as well. Like, I know that sounds silly, but sometimes you can just do whatever you've done because it's the easiest thing to do, rather than think, well, is that necessarily the right way to do it? And I think, leaving a company and moving into your own company gives you an opportunity to look at things and go, okay, well, if I was to do this, how would I do it differently? Which has been kind of a big learning curve. But I'm also very, very conscious that I don't have the answers for everything. And that's where I look to my team as well to sort of say, hey, if this doesn't make sense, then do it. And I think a lot of people sometimes just want to get through process and get it done rather than get it right. And I think if you look at what's happened in our industry and the change that's needed across the board everywhere, it's got to be everyone taking responsibility and stepping up and saying that we do need to change and we do need to question and we do need to think rather than just move through life, which I think is what we probably did pre-COVID a little bit.
Yeah, and our industry, really does sometimes lack a lot of resources to have the comfort to go and, work on yourself. But yeah, I think I found through COVID seeing the amazing amount of working groups on different issues in the industry and people coming together, this, little bit of
Oh no, we lost her.
a break. Oh no, I'm back. Hi. Sorry, guys. Jaddan, I know you do so much work in this space. What are your kind of go-to thoughts on this cultural change?
Yeah, I think it's hard because, as Marty said, like people are following process because they're so busy as well. And so, like, if I bust into a meeting and be like, Web3, blah, 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 like people are like, oh my God, chill out, Jaddan. Like, I'm just trying to finish this marketing plan, so we need to create space for it. I read an article recently, the title was Web3 Anxiety. I follow about 100 crypto people on Twitter. If I spend an hour on Twitter, like I need to lie down. Just the ideas and thoughts that people are presenting it's too much. So to just expect everyone to do that is not going to work. So we need to invest in our innovation as companies, but also as an industry. Because if we don't, we'll miss the boat that we missed with Napster. And I think that our industry has changed a lot since then. But for me, I try to lead from the front and do a lot of the work myself, because I've kind of got the time and the space to do it. But I'm definitely also the other way that we innovate is by investing in good people. And so whether that's bringing people into the company or investing in other companies, that allows us access to work that others are doing that can also help us. So a lot of our innovation strategy, a lot of our investment strategy is fueled or inspired by innovation or the desire to innovate further.
Awesome takeaways.
Sorry, I just want to ask,
Joel?
do you think it's something that, do you think it's ambition? Like, if we're talking about the Australian music industry, I was just thinking about the people that we work with and how innovative they are. Like, they're also, as well as being innovative, they're the most ambitious people that we can find. So do you think ambition breeds innovation? Like, in order to fulfill the ambition and to meet it, you have to be innovative. I'll ask that to Jaddan first.
You don't have to be, but yeah, a lot of my desire to innovate is based on ambition, and a lot of my ambition is potentially based on my fear of not necessarily failing, but of falling behind. Because for me, I feel a huge amount of responsibility to my team and to our artists and to just the people in my world. And if I just sit back and be like, we'll just put out records and put on some gigs and sell some t-shirts, my fear is that 5 years from now, we won't have the business we have today. And so, yeah, my ambition and desire to innovate is probably driven by a feeling of responsibility.
And what about you, Holly? Do you think that your ambition to be a successful artist, is that like driving you to ask these questions about innovation, about new technologies and different ways to do things?
I guess kind of like Jaddan, I'm really interested in business and music business, and I guess, my brain just wants to know what the latest thing is that's happening and try and race to understand it. And for me, that's a balance between my artistic career and my business brain and navigating those. But I think to get to that like kind of edge of innovation, you have to be ambitious enough to stay there and sit in the unknown and be like, I have no idea what fungible means. What fuck does that mean? I'm going to sit here and make myself figure it out, because otherwise you get really tired if you don't have the ambition to want to know that. But what about you, Mardi?
I was just trying to think. Partly ambition, but for me, it's more problems and frustration. And looking at something and going, okay, well, that's not working. How can we make it work better? Or, like trying to solve a problem with a bit of lateral thinking. There was a story back in the day about matchboxes and how this company was losing money and it was going to go under. And they worked out the way that they could eventually save money is just by not having the striking section on two sides of the box and putting it on one, and save their business. And it's just like, okay, well, the task there was, how do we not go broke? The solution was a really, really basic one that was probably staring them in the face, but it was hugely innovative and it changed the way matchboxes are. And I know that's a weird example, but to me, it's kind of like, okay, well, this is the problem. How can we fix it quickly? And how's the easiest way to do that will actually be efficient as well? So,
Yeah, awesome. And I guess that brings us to, I reckon, the artist business conversation, because a lot of artist businesses, we can assume, have had a really tough 2 years. And I think for me, it's made me think, how can I diversify my revenue? I need to understand NFTs. I need to, understand where this business can go because I need a reason to stay in it. That was in the darker moments of the past 2 years. But Mardi, can you give us kind of some examples of the best things you're seeing coming out of artists, how they're diversifying their revenue streams, and how artists are thinking about this next frontier?
Well, I think you're actually probably a pretty good example of what I want to talk about, which is the fact that artists are becoming more responsible about their revenue streams and more aware and more conscious of where the money's coming from and where it's coming in and how they can affect that. And at that point also how they play a responsibility within the music community generally. So, you know, whether it be people like Matt Corby and Alex Henriksen starting up RBR, which is a artist-led, artist-owned label, and trying to change the way that deals are being done from an artist perspective, to your campaign last year where you pointed out quite simply, and again it goes back to that thing, like one very small detail, one very small kind of thought point changed a whole kind of level of behaviour in Australia, when you brought up the fact that if people just use Australian music in the time that we needed it, whether it be however on phones or you know, and I'd love you to talk through where you got to that point and walk us through how you feel now watching a menu log ad and seeing how that's actually changed the campaign as well.
Yeah, oh, of course. Well, like you said, in terms of solving problems, I love that way of thinking as well. And for me, that was really like a intuitive frustration that came from, like it started from that place of watching the Olympics and just thinking, why don't we have Australian music, you know, being synced to these really clear Australian moments, and not out of sympathy for Australian artists, but because the music is so great and so diverse, and we have so many incredible artists right now from all different backgrounds. So yeah, I made that Instagram post, and I guess it could have stayed at that. It went a little bit viral, and some media happened and stuff. But I guess what we did next was probably the coolest part to me, which is myself and ARIA, Tessa from ARIA, and Larissa Ryan came together in 24 hours and made an internal call out to the industry, and we managed to get over 70 companies together in 4 days, which is pretty colossal, I thought. And we made this collective call out to corporate Australia and to Australian media, and just posed that really kind of kind invitation to say, how great would it be if you soundtracked more local homegrown music. So yeah, I didn't really have any idea that it would have this kind of impact, but I'm so excited that it did, and we've made a daily conscious effort to look at the little problems that were preventing that. Obviously, there's an approach and mindset problem that's like a, you know, commercial mindset problem, but there have been a lot of little kinks on the back end that we've put teams together for to figure out and look at that. So yeah, I think, on a separate note, the pandemic made me much more confident to speak publicly about artist revenue, because it got really serious and I didn't feel like enough artists were speaking out about it. So just, I don't know, having the confidence to jump into the unknown there was really helpful, and I'm thankful for everyone who jumped in behind that movement.
It was really spectacular. So congratulations to everyone involved in that. It was incredible.
Yeah, incredible.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Well, we have 5 minutes left. Speaking about artist businesses, Jaddan, you oversee so many artist businesses. How do you think revenue is going to diversify and change over the next few years?
Well, yeah, I'm still really passionate about streaming revenue. I think the growth that we're seeing is incredible. We launched a new business last week called Community Music. Sorry to do a plug, but we've been sort of like helping a bunch of artists self-release for years. And one of them is an artist, Connelly, who's had a lot of success and completely self-released all their music with the support of management, which is unified. But we've distributed all their music through our label structure. And me and Dan, their manager, one day were driving down to Torquay, and it was almost like a cartoon moment where you like pull over the side of the road and like, you know, write down the idea, because like, why don't we start a distribution company? Which is like, there's so many distribution companies, like why would you start a distribution company? But the point was that because of our infrastructure and because of what we're already doing, it made sense to create another option for artists to release music, which is the way we're looking at it. We're working with Mardi, with a couple of artists, with Gloomy and Sarah St. James, and hopefully more. And yeah, essentially, I just see that as a way of saying to artists, if you want to take control, there's other ways to release your music. And it doesn't have to be an NFT. That is a great option, but self-releasing commercial music is a way to also create long-term revenue streams and long-term wealth for artists. So yeah, that's something that I'm very passionate about.
Yeah, awesome to hear, and awesome for the people who don't want to know what fungible means. And Joel, what are you looking at when you look into the music industry, and also as an ex-manager, what are you most excited about?
Well, I think when you talk about the revenue and where it comes from, I still think that like the core of it is and should always be the work, the creative work. I think the challenges are just with the way that that's distributed, as I've talked about. So I think, like for me, the exciting stuff and the stuff that I'm looking at is technology and platforms that enable a better distribution of that wealth, and even just a more efficient distribution would increase the amount that goes to artists and the people that work for them significantly. I just think it's a really inefficient distribution system. So I think that should be the core of it, and I believe that the work should be the core of it, because I think if you view an artist-led business as like a product business, and you ask yourself, what are the products that business produces that are the most valuable to the world, like not just economically but socially and culturally. And I think that the core is always going to be the creative work. That's why artists exist. So I think it's really important to try and maintain that integrity in the value of that. So I'm looking at things and interested in things that make it more efficient, and also make the distribution of that a little bit more equitable. But then also just I think that we're going to see an explosion in the kinds of things that artists can produce, and in the different ways that you can produce different things but of the same thing. So we're seeing a lot of it in digital art at the moment. You can generate a piece of art at the moment, like take a single image or an algorithm and generate 100 variations of a piece of art and put that out into the world. I don't know what it's going to be in music, but I think we're just seeing the beginnings of what's possible with creativity and technology. So I'm super interested in what happens, and all this is being built in Web3. So I'm like super interested in anything that's coming in Web3, and how it's going to provide opportunities for artists to make and build revenue off things that they make besides the music. As I think a lot of the traditional methods are, you make the work, and then you find other ways to do things adjacent to that work, like touring or merchandise. But what else is possible just from a creative perspective? And I think we're seeing the start of that with writing and with digital art. I think music is next in line. So again, I don't know what it's going to be, but it's exciting to be following along.
Yeah, awesome. And if you're an artist watching this, I feel like there's no better time for you to understand the business, and these conversations are for you as well as they're for music business and industry people. So yeah, I hope everyone's found something in this conversation. I've absolutely loved it. Thank you so much, Mardi, Jaddan, and Joel.
Thank you, Holly.
And I think we are wrapping on time. So thanks again for joining, and thank you to ARIA for presenting the conversation, and Heaps Normal. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.